Welcome to Revolutionary War Lectures. So this is part 5 of 5 parts, I might add, of my lecture, Remembering the American Revolution, where we look at how you remember the founding of our country. So we're going to start off with what I call the date and the document. In this case, the document is the Constitution. So if you've ever really looked at it, the beginning of it is, of course, what we call the preamble. We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, more perfect, which implies that there was an earlier attempt to form a union, and there was, and that was our first Constitution. It's called the Articles of Confederation. It was a wartime constitution. The 13 colonies realized they had to work together in conducting the war. And so this is our first constitution. I just want to read you the first article, which is the name of the Confederacy shall be the United States of America. And that's how we got our name. Now, let's talk about the date. Can you tell me when our Constitution, the one we're under today, our second Constitution, our current Constitution, when that became effective? Well, as you may know, I'm a volunteer at Washington's headquarters in Morristown, New Jersey, where I give tours through the Ford Mansion, where Washington lived for almost 6 months during the Revolutionary War. And on my tours, I often ask questions, and one of the questions I will sometimes ask is, will someone tell me when our current Constitution took effect? I've gotten answers ranging from after the Civil War, after the First World War. So just so you know, and do you know, but just so if you don't, it actually takes effect, it becomes ratified in 1788. 1787, we have what's called the Constitutional Convention. 1788, our Constitution takes effect. So there you go with that. Now, let's talk about the duel. As soon as you hear the duel, most people immediately, it's Alexander Hamilton, right? Of course, the play certainly brought Hamilton back into the public consciousness. But I'm not going to talk about the duel. I really want to talk about what led to the duel. So we have to go back now to our Constitution that I just spoke about, our current Constitution. And in it, Congress is now going to be 2 houses. Under the first Constitution, the Articles of Confederation, Congress was 1 house. Now Congress is going to be split. It's going to be 2 houses, the House of Representatives and the Senate. And the members of both houses have to be voted, have to be elected, as opposed to our first Constitution where they were just appointed. So for the Senate, Aaron Burr defeats Philip Schuyler, who happens to have been Alexander Hamilton's father-in-law. Which brings us to the election of 1800. Now, under the Electoral College rules at that time, each elector from the Electoral College got 2 votes. And there were some other considerations, but basically whoever got the most votes was president, and whoever got the second most votes was vice president. Political parties, as we would call them today, hadn't really started yet, but there were 2 opposing factions, the Federalists and the Jeffersonians, if you will. And when all the votes were counted, lo and behold, there was a tie between Thomas Jefferson and Aaron Burr. It was a tie for president. So now it goes to the House of Representatives, and it took them 36 attempts until finally Jefferson was elected president. Well, Alexander Hamilton, who was on the other political party side, a Federalist, he went around campaigning for Jefferson against Burr. And Burr felt that Hamilton cost him the election. So again, this is now building. Now we come to the election of 1804. So Burr, who's now vice president, finds out he's not going to be asked to be Jefferson's vice president should Jefferson win a second term. So Burr decides to run for governor of New York, and he loses. And one of the reasons was Alexander Hamilton, again, campaigns against Burr. Now, in 1804, notice the date, of course, we're getting towards the duel, a letter is published in the paper, in a newspaper, and in this letter, Alexander Hamilton says Jefferson thinks of nothing but his own aggrandizement and will be content with nothing short of permanent power in his own hands. And this is the nice part of the letter. And way down at the bottom, it talks about something else Jefferson said. Something else that Burr said, which Hamilton is relating to somebody else. And Burr finally says, that's enough. You are implying that I am not an honorable person. My honor is important, the most important thing I have, actually, and I challenge you to a duel. Now, this is Philip Hamilton, who was one of Alexander Hamilton's son, and in 1801, notice the date, 1801, he was in a duel in Weehawken, New Jersey, defending his father's honor, and he was killed in that duel. Now, these are the pistols that were used in that duel. So now we're in 1804, and since Hamilton is the one who was being challenged, so to speak, he gets the choice of weapons, and he picks the same pistols that were used in his son's duel, and one of those two pistols kills Alexander Hamilton. Which leads to the question of whatever happened to Aaron Burr? Well, think about this for a second. Aaron Burr is a sitting vice president of the United States. Well, they can't do anything about it while he's president. They can't accuse him of murder and put him on trial, etc. So he serves out his term, and he has a lot of political contacts, but when his term is up, he leaves, and he kind of leaves politics. There's a long story of what happens next that I do in a different lecture. The bottom line is eventually he comes back to New York City. He resumes his legal career. He meets and marries Eliza Jamel, maybe the richest widow in New York City. Not too long after their wedding, she realizes that her fortune is disappearing. And Aaron Burr is doing some things, and again, I talk about this in a different lecture, and she files for divorce. Who is her lawyer? You ready? Alexander Hamilton Jr. You can't even make that up, right? So let's talk about the portrait of George Washington. If there's ever an image, it's the one done by Gilbert Stuart. So now I found this on the internet, and it kind of sums up what I'm going to be talking about. So there's the famous image of Washington, right? And you see Gilbert Stuart, and it looks like Martha is giving him some instructions. And of course, you can see George Washington, who I always thought had kind of a bemused look on his face. What is Martha saying? Well, of course, we don't know. We do know she told painters that they were not to show the pockmarks on the general's skin that he got after having smallpox. Well, at any rate, this particular image is, of course, the one on the $1 bill. Now, this image, you notice it is not finished, and there's a reason for that. So Martha saw this image painted a year earlier by Gilbert Stuart. She goes to Gilbert Stuart and she says, Mr. Stuart, I want that same painting. I will get the general to sit for you. And when you are finished, you will give that painting to me. Now, this is key. See, artists at that time, if they hit upon a popular image, scene, whatever, and other people wanted that same painting, that's how they made money. And so they work out a price. Gilbert Stuart starts painting. Other people start to look. And they all want that also. And suddenly Gilbert Stuart has the gold mine that every painter dreams of. Trouble is, he made a deal with Martha that when the painting was finished, he would give it to her, which means he couldn't do any reproductions. So what happens? He never finishes the painting. he made over 70 more of these based on this unfinished painting, and it is still unfinished today. And of course, we know this as the image on a $1 bill. So speaking of George Washington, I want to finish with the cherry tree. So what do you remember about the cherry tree? Well, if you're like me, and most people, George Washington cut down a cherry tree. His father said, "Who cut down the cherry tree?" And George Washington said, "I did, Father, I cannot tell a lie." So let's look at where this really came from. And it really starts with this man, Parson Weems. His real name was Mason Locke Weems. And after George Washington dies, he writes a pamphlet, a little booklet, all about George Washington. It was really meant for younger readers, and each chapter is about a virtue of George Washington, including honesty. Now, this is Grant Wood, who was another artist. Some of you may know his works. His most famous work is this one, which is called American Gothic. But Grant Wood also did a painting called Parson Weems' Fable. Now you can see Parson Weems standing in the right of the picture as you face it. You see his finger pointing to George Washington, holding the axe while his father is asking him who cut down the cherry tree. But I want you to wait a moment because we're going to zoom in on George Washington's face. And there you see Gilbert Stuart's 66-year-old head on a 6-year-old body. So what is Grant Wood trying to say? Well, George Washington is ageless. George Washington is timeless. George Washington orders you to attend, or in this case, to watch my next lecture on YouTube. So on behalf of myself and the king, the real king, thank you. Thank you very much. So this concludes my lecture, Remembering the American Revolution. My next lecture is going to be Remember the Ladies, Women During the American Revolution. So until next time, thanks for watching.